Hi YouTube. Today I'm going to be doing a how-to video on how to take apart, clean, and put back together a Gerber 06 automatic. There's not many videos on how to do this, and I thought I'd make one for you. Now I know a few of you might be asking, why am I working on the floor? Well, I'm working on the floor because there are a lot of small pins and springs in this particular device that might pop out, and I don't want it rolling under a couch or rolling under a seat or rolling under anything else. What I want is for it to fall on the floor where I can quickly find it and put it back in. So it's just my suggestion to work on the floor, put a towel down, and work like that. If you look closely at these two knives, they are both the same model and both purchased on the same day, but one was put through 7 years of hard use and abuse, and it doesn't look too much different from the brand new one right out of the box. They're great knives, very durable, and it's the only pocket knife that I suggest anybody carry, just because it's always worked for me and it's never broken on me. Keep in mind that we're going to be taking apart a knife. Knives are very sharp and they are very dangerous, and you should be using the appropriate safety gear. You should be using safety goggles and cut-proof gloves. Also keep in mind, in reference to safety, that if you don't have the appropriate skill level to complete this task, don't do it. Refer to the manufacturer for repair services, or refer to a professional to help you with your problem. So remember, knives are very sharp. Be very, very careful when taking it apart and putting it back together. So now that we covered safety, you'll need a few items before we begin. You will need a Torx set, Torx screwdrivers. You will need a rag to wipe the components down with. You will need either a military-style all-purpose brush or AP brush. Or, if you don't have access to one of these, you can use a simple toothbrush. That'll help as well. I like using Marvel Mystery Oil, but any kind of lubricating or penetrating oil will do the trick. And once it's all clean and ready to go back together, we want to lubricate certain points with some Automotive grease. Very small amount though. So now I'm going to disassemble the old knife so we can clean it and put it back together. I'm going to take apart the knife by starting with these small Torx bits right here. Should be 9mm Torx. And I'm also going to take this Torx screw right out right here, and I will cut back when I have all those screws taken out. So now I took all the screws out, and the knife pretty much falls apart right after that. Everything comes apart, and it comes apart fairly easily. The only problem is putting it back together. So once you have the entire knife apart, it's fairly easy to go from here as far as the next step goes. This is just where you make sure you keep everything organized. As you see, we have springs over here. There's a small pin that you have to keep in mind. You don't want to lose that. So let me find that pin, because it bounced around here somewhere, and I'll cut right back. So just to recap, after you take apart the screws and take the center screw out of the bevel, and there's a bevel in here. I have it all greased up already. Once all of that comes apart, everything just falls right apart very easily. And like I said again, the hardest part is going to be getting it all back together, including this little tensioner spring right here, which is really not designed to come apart, but I'm going to show you a little trick. Yep, as you can see, there it is. I'm going to show you a little trick on how to get it back together. So I'm going to take a minute, and I'm just going to go ahead and take some lubricating oil, put it on my brush, and I'm going to start scrubbing all the rust out of here. This particular one has seen a lot of abuse in salt water and in many search and rescue situations where I had to use it to cut a piece of rope, or save something, save myself. You could only imagine. So that's 7 years. It's 7 years of hard service and hard abuse, and I'm going to show you how to get it all cleaned up and put it back together. Just a couple drops on the old scrubbing brush, and scrub it up real good. Make sure you get that oil nice and in there, and make sure you take out all that dirt, all that grime. Use that brush, scrub nice and hard, nice and fast, and make sure you get everything out of there. Make sure you use a nice coat of oil and cover all the parts with oil while you scrub. As you can see, you got a lot of salt here, and we got to get all of this out. And you will see how everything goes back together. But I want to just let you go to town here. Make sure you use your gloves on the blade especially, and clean all of that up. Get a lot of oil everywhere, and just make sure you get all of that grease out, because you can only do this every once in a while. You'll see later how it gets pretty hard. There's a little bit of surface rust on this metal. We're going to just scrub really hard, really fast. And you know, you're supposed to use 2 hands here. Scrub really hard, really fast, and get all that surface rust off. And just make sure that penetrating oil gets in there. And of course, let every part sit for a while in the oil. And of course, you could drop the oil directly on there and then use the brush to spread it around. Using cut-resistant gloves, this is when you would want to throw some penetrating oil onto the blade, but remember, you could always clean the blade. Pay special attention to this part right here. This is the part you don't really have access to when the knife is all put together. This is pretty beat up, so I'm going to go ahead and clean this up for you. So again, wearing cut-resistant gloves, make sure you clean it up, scrub it real good, and make sure you get a lot of oil, and scrub really thoroughly on this little section of the knife, which is where it hinges to the handle. You want to go ahead and get that, because you don't really have access to that. Well, you don't have access to that ever while the knife is put back together, so you want to clean that up real good. Again, you only want to do this once, so you'll see why. It's a pain later. But you only want to do this once, so you don't really have to do it often. This is the spring that actually forces the blade open once the trigger is pushed. This spring here is under a lot of tension, and well, when the knife is closed. But when the knife is open, it's not really under much tension at all. Now I'm going to show you how we're going to use that to put the blade back together. Clean this up very well, because it's got a little bit of grease on it. A lot of dirt sticks to it, and because I've been in the water with this knife, and because I've done a lot of crazy stuff with this knife, it does get dirty. If you go out into the woods, stuff like that, dirt gets in it, you know, all kinds of stuff. And remember, when the knife is put back together, you can only clean the outside, you can't get into the springs. So here we have the spring. Make sure you scrub that down with penetrating oil, let it sit, and get ready to wipe it down. This here is the button or the trigger that activates the opening mechanism of the knife. This is clean because I already wiped it down, but you're going to see a lot of dirt, you're going to see a lot of grime, you're going to see a lot of stuff on this. Make sure you wipe it off, make sure it's nice, polished to a mirror shine. Give it some more penetrating oil, and scrub it away, scrub it all away. So this is why I tell you to work on the floor. When you're on the floor and anything falls, and it just falls right on the towel, it's not going to fall and then go rolling around. And you're going to see when we start assembling this thing how pins work. That is particular, this one right here, that one is just going to fly out all over the place quite a few times. It's going to take a little bit of trial and error to get it back in. So now we have the knife all cleaned up. We have a lot of penetrating oil all over the place. We have just pretty much everything covered in oil. You can go as far as leaving it in oil all night if it's that bad. This particular knife, even though I've given it years of abuse, it's really not that bad. There's not that much rust, just a little bit of surface rust, and everything wipes back to its nice matte black finish. Wipe it all down, but not yet. I'm going to let it sit for a minute in the penetrating oil. You can leave it all night, and I'm going to take a break. And when I come back, we'll continue from here. So we're back. I got the knife all cleaned up. I'm going to go ahead and wipe it all down, making sure I wipe everything completely clean. I like to wipe it dry. I don't like to leave oil on it. I'm going to wipe it completely dry, and then I'm going to lubricate certain points. But I definitely want to wipe it all down, and you do that so that dirt doesn't get in there and stick. And I'm just going to keep on wiping it down. Wipe everything down, make sure everything gets nice and clean, and just wipe it all dry. If you're going to put more oil on it, you can. Just wipe it clean before you do it. So make sure every part gets completely wiped clean before you start putting it back together. This particular part right here, the pocket clip, this gets a lot of abuse, but you don't really give it a lot of attention. Make sure you take that apart and clean that to perfection, and then wipe that down, wipe it nice and clean. Make sure you get all the rust out of there, and we'll start setting this knife up to get put back together. So with everything nice and wiped down, nice and clean, I'm going to go ahead and open my Automotive bearing grease, and I'm going to take my bearing grease, I'm going to put a little bit of grease onto this bevel right here, which is going to slip on top of the, I'm just going to go ahead and call it the hinge. I'm going to take a little grease, and I'm going to put it, using my finger, I'm going to put it, and please wear gloves on this, I'm going to put it right on the bevel. And then I'm going to go ahead and put that bevel onto that screw. So, next step, I'm going to take that hinge that I just lubricated with the little bevel that goes around the hinge. I'm going to take that and I'm just going to simply lay the, I'm going to go ahead and call it the left side of the handle. Right side's over here. I'm calling it the right. Matter of fact, I should call it the left. Take the left side, okay, where the actual spring goes into, and you're going to lay it right over top and make sure the bevel goes right into there. And then you're going to take your spring with a little bit of lubrication. I'm going to put some lube on it here shortly. And you're going to take it and you're going to lay it right in there so that this little pin, the little part that sticks out, is going to catch right in that little groove right there. And you want to let it sit right there. I'm going to show you what to do next. So now I got the spring sitting inside of the, I'm going to call it the outer shell there. You're going to take your inner shell, you're going to lay that right on top to cover that spring up. After that, you're going to take this piece right here, this particular one, and you're going to lay it right into this, let me see if I can get it in there. You're going to lay it right into this hole, and you're going to let it sit right there. Let me get a close-up for you. You're going to just leave it right there just like that. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to put the screw into that. So now we have the outer shell and the inner shell, or the inner frame, I guess, joined together with the spring, the little pin that comes out of the spring, in between, sandwiched in between this part right here. You can't see it because I put the screw, see if you can see the screw, I put the screw back into this part right here that holds it all together. Then you're going to take the big end of this little pin. As you can see, there's a small end and there's a big end. You're going to take the big end and you're going to lay the big end into that little slot right there. Now you're going to marry your other two sides together, the side with the safety on it. You're going to take the button, lay it right into the hole, the outer side, right into the hole. It fits. And then you're going to take the outer shell and you're going to lay it right on top. It takes a little bit of coercion to get it in there, but once you got it, there it is. And while I got it like this, I'm just going to go ahead and take a little bit of Automotive lubricant, the bearing grease, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lay some bearing grease right on these metal contact points. As you can see, the finish has been worn away a little bit because there's nothing to lubricate it. How often do you get oil in here? It's metal on metal more often than not. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to get some oil on these little parts right here. Don't get too crazy with the oil, just put enough to where it leaves a nice thin coat. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this center block. This is the it holds the window breaker, which protrudes out of the back of the handle, and for the purpose of smashing glass, should you need to in an emergency, right here. You're going to take that. You're going to lay it right on here. I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to get those screws into the back side, and I'm just going to go ahead and put that in. I probably should have done that before I did these other ones here, but that's okay. Again, you see, this is the reason why I work on the floor, so that the pins don't roll around all over the place. That little guy right there was under my couch, was under my table was under everything, and it rolls around the first time you do this. So that's why I work on the floor whenever I'm taking apart this knife. It's just because the pins and springs tend to roll all over the place. Sorry about my dirty fingernails. I was working on the car before this. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw these screws, the small ones. I'm going to take the small ones and I'm going to put them in this handle right here to stick that whole thing back together. Just be careful that the spring doesn't come out. If it comes out, it's alright, just put it back in. Just make sure that the pin that retains it, which is just underneath the inner shell, that's what I'm going to call it, make sure that pin is just sticking out just a little bit, just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and put those screws in. I'll come right back. So now I use the long screws. I might have said short screws before. I apologize. I use the long screws to reattach the pocket clip, which is now all cleaned and wiped off, and the window breaker, which is also all cleaned and wiped off, free of grease. As you can see, there was a little bit of surface rust that kind of stayed there, but I wiped all of that off. So it's mostly all gone. It's just like some kind of imprint. So I got all of that back together. Now I'm going to go ahead and continue where I left off. So again, keeping the little pin, the little end up, you're going to put the big end into the little slot for it right there. Now if you notice, there's a hole for where this particular pin that comes out of the spring, where that particular pin, the mainspring is what I'm going to call it, I guess, that pin is supposed to go into this hole. But if you see, the knife would almost have to be kicked back like this in order to get to it, in order to put the tension on it. Well, I know what you're going to try, because I've tried it several times. I tried putting it in and then spinning it around. But that doesn't work. I'm going to show you a better way. So now comes the tricky part. You're going to take what we got, remove the little guy. I know we've put it in several times already, but remove that one. You're just going to drop her out again, drop the bevel out again. It's covered in grease, I know, leave it alone. Move everything out of your way, because this is going to be a little tricky. You're going to take your blade and you're going to lay it right on top of the pin, keeping the pin into the hole. And you are going to keep tension on it, and you're going to push the knife over and rotate it around and hold that right there while you put this into that hole through the other side, through the underside. So you technically have to hold this knife and lift it up, and then stick that bevel and hinge combo underneath the knife to hold the knife in place while you do the next step. Okay, now here comes the tricky part. You're going to take the spring, take the little pin that comes out of the spring, you're going to fit it into the hole just like this. How to load the tension? You swing the knife around just like this and cover the hole. Swing the knife around and cover the hole. Now you have tension on your spring. Be very, very careful. Take your bevel and your hinge and slide it up through the center and hold that steady. Hold that just like that. So I found an assistant to help me with this, which is what I suggest you should do. It takes a lot to get this done. You're going to marry the spring with the hole cut out for the knife. But remember, the pin is right there, and the hole in the hinge is right here. You're going to push them over to load the tension onto the spring, just like that. You're going to take your hinge and your bevel, you're going to go up through the center of the knife, trying to keep it center and keeping plenty of tension on it. While you have the tension on the knife, there's a flat part cut out into the bevel, and you need to make sure that that's rotated towards the point of the knife. If you make sure that that's rotated towards the point of the knife, you'll only have to do this once, hopefully. And as you can see, it's much easier with an assistant helping me hold the camera. You're going to take your pin, like I've showed you many times, and you're going to lay it back in. You're going to take your button spring, and you're going to lay it into that area right there. You're going to take your other halves. I'm just going to go with this half for now. And I'm going to lay it in just like so. Keep the tension on the knife so that the spring doesn't come out. There you go. Success. Just like that. Now you have a knife with tension on it. You're going to insert your button into here, which of course you're going to need to bend the blade out of the way in order to get to. You'll probably have to work on this just a little bit, but once you get it in there, it'll work. Matter of fact, I'm going to need to put tension back on the blade because the button has to go in actually before the shell goes back. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off, which is risky. I'm going to go ahead and take this off. Remember to keep the tension on the blade. Put the button back in. The button kind of goes inside. And now I've got it. So now you have your fingers in the way. Now I've got the bevel back in. So now you have all of this lined up. Your button is working, okay, and we'll figure that out here in a minute. You have a hinge holding your knife. Now I'm holding it under such tension, I'm squeezing on this knife because I don't want it to pop apart. But you definitely want to hold on to this nice and tight. Then you're going to take your other half. Oh, and you see, that's another reason why you got to hold tension on the blade. Because the spring popped out. Okay, we got it back in. Hold it just like that. Hold it as tight as you can, especially if everything's lined up. Don't play with it. And throw your other half of the shell right on top. Now it popped out again. You can do this as long as you keep tension on the blade. Play with it and you can get it in there. Just going to loosen it just a little bit. And we're in. And we'll hold that. And I'll get the top part on. And we are in there. So everything's put back together. Everything's held right. It takes a lot to do this, so be very, very careful, especially with the knife. The main spring for the hinge is going to go back in. It's almost like you need 3 arms to be able to do this. Now, if you're going to put Loctite on the screws, hold off until you have the whole knife back together, and then do 1 screw at a time individually. Don't try to put Loctite on and then try to throw this whole knife back together. It's just not going to work. The grease, unfortunately, you got to do that before you put the knife back together, because then you'll never be able to get it off. But we already did that, so we don't have to worry about that. As you can see, the knife popped out. But while it's all back together again, let's see if we can't force it in like this. No, we can't. So we're going to have to take it all apart again. Hopefully we get this out in editing. So now, with each one of the screws back in, then they're just a little bit past tight. So once you got them tight, just a little bit more, and then that's it. These screws will strip, so just be very careful. I'm going to go ahead and put the main hinge screw back in, and then we're going to test it. All right, YouTube. So we're done with the reassembly. And we have the 2 knives, the one that came out of the box. This is brand new. This is the one we did not touch. As you can see, it's absolutely brand new. And then we have the one that we took apart and we worked on, we cleaned, we put back together, and let's test it. So it locks, the safety works, it opens, the safety locks, the blade does not bend backwards, and the blade is just absolutely solid. It's clean, it works good, it's well lubricated, and it should serve me for another 7, maybe even more. As long as I keep it clean, keep it rust free, I can always keep this in my ready bag and ready for service, which is awesome. So we did it, and it's kind of hard, so just be careful when you're doing it, and again, always think safety first. Thank you, and have a great day.